I just want to let the man speak for himself. So please welcome to the stage Most Reverend Bishop James D. Conley.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Is it real? A little bit of water here. Let me get the... 1 second. Excuse me. I'd like to start with a prayer. Thank you for coming. It's great to be in Phoenix. It's not the same kind of weather in Nebraska, so I'm really happy to be here. But I'd like to start with a prayer. It's a prayer, you've probably heard it before, but it's a prayer written by Blessed John Henry Newman, another great convert who had a big influence on my life and still does. And convert he was a 19th century Anglican and became a Catholic during the middle part of the 19th century and taught at Oxford and really brought a lot of people into the Catholic Church and still is bringing people into the Catholic Church. And he had a tremendous influence on my conversion and my vocation to the priesthood. And even as a bishop, I stole his coat of arms and his motto from my own. I wasn't sure if that was legal or not, so I had to call a friend in Rome if that was okay, and it was. Bishops have done that before. So his episcopal motto, or his cardinalatial motto, was Cor ad cor loquitur, heart speaks to heart. And that's the motto I chose for my consecration as a bishop. So he's had a big influence on me, and he has a beautiful prayer, and it's more of a meditation. It's kind of on the mission of our lives and how important our lives are in God's providence. He was a great believer in divine providence, and that we all have a part to play, and we all have a very important role to play in the salvation of the world, each one of us in our particular vocations, whatever they are. And so let's begin with the prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me, which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do his work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place, while not intending it, if I but do keep his commandments. Therefore I will trust him. Whatever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. He does nothing in vain. He knows what he is about. He may take away my friends. He may throw me among strangers. He may make me feel desolate, make my spirit sink, hide my future from me. Still, he knows what he is about. Blessed John Henry Newman, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Now I'm going to put my phone away because I'm going to talk about the evil of these things. So, is it going to compete with this? You want to take this, Mari? Because I don't want it anymore. Because sometimes it kind of competes with the other thing I'm wired up here. So, anyway, let me begin by telling you how grateful I am. Grateful to Ben and Mari and everyone associated with Catholic Phoenix for the invitation to travel to Phoenix today to speak at the Spring 2018 lecture series here at St. Mary's High School in downtown Phoenix. Now, when I left Lincoln this morning, it was 17 degrees and there were 3 inches of snow on the ground, and they had to de-ice the plane twice in the Omaha airport. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to have a sneak preview of spring here in Phoenix before I go back to the frigid Middle West. The mission of Catholic Phoenix, and I looked this up, is, quote, to nurture the moral, intellectual, and cultural lives of Catholics in the Diocese of Phoenix. And, what a great organization this is. I had dinner, with Doug and Alex and some of the others, and just listening to what they're trying to do here with this organization is wonderful. I wish we had something like this in Lincoln. In fact, it's given me some ideas. We have a young adults group called the Frassati group, but we don't have something quite like this, which really kind of focuses on the moral, intellectual, and cultural lives of Catholics in our diocese. So it's a great privilege to be here with you. And it's a particular joy to be in Phoenix, where Bishop Olmsted is your bishop. Now, he would be here tonight, he told me, because we saw each other 2 weeks ago at the consecration of the new bishop in Jefferson City, Missouri, who was a Wichita priest, which I was a Wichita priest. But there's a big Theology of the Body conference going on tonight. So lots going on in Phoenix. This is a happening place. So it's a joy to be here in his diocese. And as you probably know, Bishop Olmsted is a priest of the Diocese of Lincoln. So in a certain sense, I'm his bishop. So you can tell him that. But he also, and he's remembered with great fondness in Lincoln still to this day. And his parents live, his father died recently, as you know, and his mother and siblings still live just south of the border in Kansas, which is my home state. So he has deep ties in Kansas and Nebraska. And before being appointed Bishop of Phoenix, as you probably know, Bishop Olmsted was the Bishop of Wichita and my bishop for 4 years. And we were not happy at all when John Paul II took him away from us and sent him to Phoenix in 2003. But in God's providential plan, that was really the wonderful gift that we gave you. And and we were happy to do it. We were happy to do it because he's done such great things here. I mean, he's done wonderful things here. That wonderful pastoral letter, Into the Breach, and all kinds of things. That's just one example. But he's just really, he's one of my heroes. And because of his clear teaching, his courageous witness, and his obvious holiness. But he's also a dear friend. So it's a double joy to be here because it's his diocese. And another reason why I'm happy to be in Phoenix is because there are a number of former University of Dallas graduates living here in Phoenix. Some of them are here tonight because I saw them, we were coming in. And it's always good to be with old friends that who now are not so young as they were when I had them as college students. They're having babies and tall children now that are taller than me, which is amazing. But those years I was University of Dallas Rome campus during my tenure at the Vatican were wonderful years, and so many of my former students, many of whom are in this city, have grown up and gone on and done wonderful things in the church. So it's a bit of a reunion for me, and I'm going to see a lot of them tomorrow as well. So, and I'm also happy too with the connection with Mari's mother, Dr. Moffat. I'm the national Episcopal advisor to the Catholic Medical Association, and Dr. Maricela Moffat was one of the former past presidents, and we serve on the board together for the Catholic Medical Association. So those are all my connections to Phoenix, my introduction to those things. So it's great to be back in Phoenix here with you. And I've been looking forward to this gathering for months, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to be with all of you this evening to share some ideas and reflections, and we'll have some time. I'm going to talk, I have to tell this to myself too, it's about 6:50, right? I had to change my clock because it's 6:50 here. So Mari's given me about 50 minutes or so, an hour, to talk, and won't be that long. So you can rest assured it won't be that long unless I get off text. So, and then we'll have a time for some Q&A afterwards. So that's kind of what the evening is going to be about. And the title of my talk is The Renewal of the Catholic Soul in Our Age of Noise. Okay? The renewal of the Catholic soul in our age of noise. 25 years ago, a Norseman by the name of Erling Kagge, K-A-G-G-E, skied alone to the South Pole. And it took him 50 days. The temperature fell as low as negative 58 degrees. I had never heard of Erling Kagge, and I suspect probably nobody else has. But he is a successful lawyer. I know we have some lawyers here. He's a successful lawyer. He owns a publishing company, and he's a best-selling author. He also has a well-respected art collection. So suffice it to say, Erling Kagge is not a lunatic. But before he began his journey, a journey that most of us would consider crazy, he took the batteries out of his radio, which was the only link he would have to the world as he traveled across a frozen continent. He threw them in the trash can of the plane he took to Antarctica. He wanted to make the journey in absolute silence and all alone. In fact, he was the first person in history to reach the South Pole all alone. Erling Kagge published a book in 2016 about his journey to the South Pole, entitled Silence in the Age of Noise. And Kagge wrote that as he skied, he realized something. He said that, quote, "The quieter I became, the more I heard." I'll repeat that again. The quieter I became, the more I heard. Last year, he said in a New York Times interview that, quote, "It's easy to think silence is about turning your back on the world," he said. "For me, it's the opposite. It's opening up to the world, respecting more, and loving life." End of quote. Now, as far as I know, Kagge is not a believer, or at least not an outspoken one, if he is. But he has discovered something very important. He has discovered the danger of the frenetic and terrifying age of noise. And he has discovered the extraordinary power of silence. The English satirist Aldous Huxley wrote in 1945 that modernity is the, quote, "age of noise." End of quote. And he was writing about radio back in 1945, whose noise, he said, quote, "penetrates the mind, filling it with the babble of distractions, news items, mutually irrelevant bits of information, blasts of corybantic or sentimental music, continually repeated doses of drama that bring no catharsis." End of quote. Now, if Huxley would have lived in the 21st century, he would have seen the age of noise doubled down and amplified beyond the radio, first to our televisions, then to our Walkmans. Remember those? Some of you do. You're betraying your age. Then to iPods. Some of you remember those. Then to tablets, mobile devices, machines which bring distraction and doses of drama with us wherever we go. We are today awash in information, assaulted often with tweets and pundits, analyzing the latest crisis in Washington or difficulties in the church or serious social, political, or environmental issues. It can be, for many people, overwhelming. To be sure, we have a responsibility as faithful Catholics to be aware of the world and its challenges, and to be engaged in the cultural and political affairs of our communities. We cannot shirk or opt out of that responsibility. As a Catholic bishop, for example, I don't have the luxury of choosing not to do email, or even of using social media. There's where I find most of my flock, and this is an important avenue through which I can preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and reach thousands, perhaps millions of souls. I have 11.4 thousand people who follow me on Twitter. That's kind of scary. Be careful what I say. But we are living at a moment of constant urgencies and crisis. What some have called the tyranny of the immediate. The tyranny of the immediate. And no person can sustain this kind of noise, polemical, shrill, and reactive often, which has become a substitute for conversation in contemporary culture. Nor should a person try. The age of noise diminishes virtue and charity and imagination, replacing them with anxiety and worry and exhaustion. Some praise, for example, the ability to multitask, when in reality, multitasking is simply the ability to do many things at the same time very poorly and in a mediocre way. Let's be honest. We are made to concentrate and to focus in a singular way, to be attentive to things in an intentional way, with all of our senses engaged. The Lord didn't make us for this kind of noise. He made us for conversation, for encounter, and for communion. But the Lord also made us for silence, for contemplation, for quietude and stillness. And without these things anchoring our lives and our hearts, the age of noise transforms us, fostering in our hearts reactive and uncharitable, oftentimes intemperance, that characterizes the media and social media spaces which shape our culture. The age of noise keeps grinding away at our souls. As believers, we are called to become counter witnesses to this age of noise, for the sake of our own souls, of course, but also for the sake of the kingdom of God. People like Erling Kagi are starting to see the problems with the age of noise and asking, what can be done? How is it possible to live differently? The answer to that question, like the answer to all questions that trouble our hearts, is Jesus Christ. As St. John Paul II would often say, Jesus Christ is the answer to the question that is every human life. That's one of my favorite expressions of John Paul II. Jesus Christ is the answer to the question that is every human life. The Church, the sacrament of salvation, knows the mystery of silence and its deepest object, communion with Jesus Christ. So tonight I would like to offer 3 reflections on the age of noise and the ways in which we might be renewed and refreshed in our souls so that we might find peace of soul in an age of frenetic and plaguing discontent. And I'd like to begin by talking about children. Many of you may have heard by now of a new book entitled iGen by a psychologist from San Diego State University by the name of Jean Twenge, PhD psychologist on the faculty there. And the full title of her book, it's a great title, is iGen, Why Today's Superconnected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. And the book is about and it's a study, it's a longitudinal study that she, as a scientist, undertook for many years. It's a study about our technology, the impact of our technology on young people. Dr. Twenge has studied generational differences as a psychologist for 25 years. In her research, she writes that around the year 2012, she noticed a dramatic shift in teen behaviors and emotional states. In fact, she says the shift was unlike anything she had seen in her own work or in data about generational characteristics dating back to 1930. Those shifts, she says, denote an experience of life among young people radically different than people a few years older than them, and radically different from anything recorded in all of her data. 2012 was the year that the proportion of Americans who owned smartphones surpassed 50%. It's probably 75 or 80% now, I would guess. The fact, Dr. Twenge says, this fact has completely shaped a generation. And she calls them the iGeners. Young people born between 1995 and 2012. Those are kind of the years. These are young people growing up with smartphones and Instagram and Snapchat and internet available to them 24/7. That's all they've ever known. There hasn't been any time when they weren't around those kinds of technologies. The oldest member of iGeners were only 12 when the smartphone was first introduced in 2007. They were 15 when iPads were introduced in 2010. They were 9 when Facebook was launched, and 11 when Twitter came onto the scene. These things have shaped the social patterns, their daily lives, and most interestingly, their neurological patterns. They live their lives on their phones. They report being more comfortable in their bedrooms than in a car with friends or at a party. They are less likely to drink or engage in premarital sex than their predecessors. They report being unattracted to the teenage values of yesteryear, to the independence, for example, and rebellion of a James Dean or the Grateful Dead. I'm an old Deadhead, by the way. Very old. They are less likely to smoke or do drugs than previous generations were. They're even less likely, far less likely, to get driver's licenses before they finish high school. But they are not happy, and they're not healthy. Dr. Twenge says that the rates of teen depression and suicide have skyrocketed since 2011. They report being lonely, depressed, and isolated. Erling Kegi, the Norseman that I quoted at the beginning, wrote his book on silence because he said that his own daughters had grown up with iPhones practically attached to their bodies. He said they didn't know what silence was, and he lamented. They are living virtual lives. They are not experiencing real things, contact with real people. And Dr. Twenge says the virtual reality of their day-to-day lives is what is making them unhappy. Here's what Dr. Twenge reports in her book, quote, 8th graders who spend 10 or more hours a week on social media are 56% more likely to say they're unhappy than those who devote less time to social media. Admittedly, 10 hours a week is a lot. But those who spend 6 to 9 hours a week on social media are still 47% more likely to say that they're unhappy than those who use social media even less. The opposite, you're going to say the opposite is true of in-person interaction, interpersonal interactions. Those who spend an above average amount of time with their friends in person are 20% less likely to say they're unhappy than those who hang out for a below average amount of time with each other. End of quote. Bottom line, she says, quote, all screen activities are linked to less happiness, and all non-screen activities are linked to more happiness. There's not a single exception to that in her studies. So our kids, young people, need real things. They need to experience the world, nature. They need to experience sunshine and snow, but not here, I guess. Music, romance, and mistakes. They need to experience friendship. And we have an obligation to give those things to them and to provide opportunities for them to experience real things. There are other issues as well. Today's young people believe in technocracy. That is, they believe that the limits of what we are able to do in technology determine the limits of our morality. They believe that somehow science and faith are incompatible. That was one of the things she discovered, that they see that faith and reason are mutually exclusive. That if you believe in God, then you really can't accept reason. Or that if you believe in religion, then you don't believe in science. They've somehow separated those two. They believe that religion also is the cause of unhappiness, inequality. They see religion as promoting inequality because equality has become this overarching virtue. And they believe that religion is the cause of violence in the world. Now, these things aren't true, of course, and we have an obligation to show them that. We have an obligation to show them that through the experience of real things, what it means to be human, to be made in the image and likeness of God, is really the key to human flourishing and happiness and a good life. Some of you know that I'm a graduate of the University of Kansas, the Integrated Humanities Program. It was mentioned in the introduction. By the way, Kansas beat Texas Tech today. I have to say this at Rock Chalk they secured now they're at least assured of co-champions for the 14th consecutive year of their conference, which they broke John Wooden's record at UCLA. So that's huge. So Rock Chalk Jayhawk. Anyway, I had it's not in the text, but I had to say that. So it was a good day. And that's why I was late to dinner, guys, because I was watching the last part of that game. But I was in this great books program called the Integrated Humanities Program. And it flourished in the 1970s and the 1980s at KU. And when I began the program, I don't think I had ever read a book cover to cover. I went to a big high school in South Kansas City, 714 in my graduation class. And it was, I had a very poor education. And this was in the early 70s, and probably the low point of public education, experimental education. And so I wasn't an AP student, I was an honors student. When I talk about, the Integrated Humanities Program and the effect that it had on me, some people think, well, this must have been some honors program for students who are interested in classical education. No, I didn't have a clue. I hadn't read really anything. And we were just typical, normal, suburban freshmen in college. And none of us really had a background in this kind of thing. And the professors used to joke that the Integrated Humanities Program was a remedial program for students like me, who had no experience prior to that of the true and the good and the beautiful. And so they were really basically playing catch-up for us and introducing us to the true and the good and the beautiful through literature and poetry and music and art and friendship. And it was just a combination that, it just ignited our minds and opened our hearts to a whole new world that we'd never known before. And because of it, there were literally hundreds of conversions to the Catholic faith. So much so that the American Civil Liberties Union and the Jewish Defense League filed a lawsuit against the University of Kansas, accusing the professors of proselytizing in a state university. This was during the Moonies. You guys remember the Moonies? You know, the cults that were in the... And so there was another cult, and that this was a Catholic cult. And there was these hearings that I remember going to them at the Union, which made the program more popular, by the way. And the professors were sort of on trial, you know, and we would go there and watch these things. And the dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, after a few sessions, threw the case out. You know, there was no evidence of proselytizing. All three of these professors were tenured professors. They'd all won the highest award that the university gives, the Hope Award. And they didn't proselytize. If you were... John Senior was one of the teachers. He was my godfather. And and a lot of the students, he was sort of the mystic of the three. They all three had very different personalities. One was a World War II fighter pilot, Navy fighter pilot, and drove a red Corvette and wore these shades, you know, and carried a switchblade and smoked Camel non-filter cigarettes. Well, that was when you could still smoke in the classroom, and he would smoke these cigarettes, you know, and he'd look out, he'd puff, he'd look out, you know, and we were deathly afraid of him. He'd pull the switchblade out, you know, and just kind of throw it off to the side. And our classes were in a lecture hall like this. They would sit up here in 3 chairs, and we'd sit out there in the chairs just like you, and it was filled. We had like 150 in my class, and they would just team teach this, and they all three were very different. But John Senior, who became my godfather, you know, when I asked him about the Catholic Church, because eventually I did ask that question, he would always tell us to go see the priest, go down and see the local parish priest. The student center was not formed yet. Now there's a very vibrant St. Lawrence Center at the University of Kansas. But at the time it was the parish church, and there was a wonderful Irish priest, Father Michael Moriarty, who would just sit back and wait, and all these students would come down off the hill because Lawrence is up on a hill, and he had every semester he'd have like 15, 20 students, and they all come into the church. And year after year, hundreds of students who were all students of this integrated humanities program. But they never did, and they were very careful, they never did teach any religion in the courses. It was, we came across those questions about what is God and what is good and what is evil and what is truth in the books we read, but you know, they never did any proselytizing in the classroom. They just introduced us. In fact, Dr. Senior said, you know, he says, I think my job as a teacher is I'm a janitor. He says, all I do is open the door for people and show them this huge world and this huge treasure, you know, of Western civilization. And that's what they introduced to us. But more than anything, and I used to say that my conversion was intellectual. I read my way into the Catholic Church, and there was truth to that. But as I get older and look back on it, it really wasn't my mind that really led me finally to the church. It was my heart. Because more than anything, the humanities program was about the discovery of real things and the joy and the delight of literature and music and poetry. Something that I know schools here at St. Mary's, as well as the Great Heart Schools, some of you are involved in that. Villa de Marie is another one that take that kind of traditional Catholic liberal arts tradition, which has been around for hundreds of years, which really engenders, and this is the thing that probably, if I had to boil it down to one thing that I learned, and that was the love of learning, the love of learning. And it set me on a trajectory for the rest of my life, to know more. And we can never exhaust that. And there's so much, so many big books in so little time. That's what I always, got a t-shirt that says so many books in so little time. And less time now because of technology. But it was through the friendships too, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Through the friendships, but also through the joy of learning to waltz and attending a formal waltz. Every year in the spring we would have this formal waltz. We'd all get a dance card, and we'd have 6 different young ladies' names. And they'd have 6, we'd hire out the university orchestra and the university ballroom at the Kansas Union, and we'd dress up in very uncomfortable tuxedos, probably ecru, remember that color? That was a color that the men's shirts were. It was very ugly. The guys looked really bad. The girls always looked beautiful, long gowns, and we would have to, we'd have to escort a girl out onto the dance floor, and we'd have waltzing lessons because nobody knew how to waltz. I was a deadhead, so I didn't know really how to waltz. And so we had to learn how to take a lady out onto the floor and waltz this Strauss waltz, and it was not easy, and we wanted to, of course, you were very self-conscious, as all college students were, so you wanted to do it right and well and impress the young lady. But it taught us manners, and it taught, the men to become gentlemen and the women to become ladies, and it lifted us up to something bigger than ourselves. So the joy of learning to waltz, and also through the outdoors, through stargazing, for example, and camping, and experiencing the agricultural rhythms that seem to be embedded in the soul of God's created world. One of the things we did was we go out on Monday nights and look at the constellations. And we were reading mythology. The first whole year was pagan literature. We didn't read any Christian book the first year. It was the Greeks and the Romans. And that first year, we learned the Greek mythology, and we would learn the constellation of the stars and the Greek myths behind the constellations, the names of the constellations, which are all based on Greek mythology. But and it wasn't so much the learning of that, but it was getting the students outside and looking up and wondering. And the motto of the program was this Latin phrase by this very prolific Latin author, anonymous. Nobody knows who wrote it. Nascantur in admiratione. Let them be born in wonder. Let them be born in wonder. That was the motto of the program. All they wanted to do their goal was just to get us to look up and wonder. And if we could do that, they felt that they had accomplished a great deal. So, don't get me wrong, at the same time I was experiencing those things, I was also doing the other things that typical college students do. I was in a rock band, which was not very good. It was called Harmonious Confusion, emphasis on confusion. And we were doing things that typical college students would do, but there was something going on. And the point is that I was blessed to discover real things in those years. Dr. Nellick, the one with the switchblade and the Camel non-filters, he used to say, "Rocks are hard and water is wet." That was one of his most, and everybody, that's what we think of. Frank Nellick, rocks are hard, water's wet. To this day, if I run into rocks are hard, water's wet, it's stuck with us, and it's true, but it's so simple, and it's, such common sense, but common sense isn't so common anymore. But that's reality. Rocks are hard and water is wet. The iGen generation is depressed because it's missing reality, because it's lying in bed instead of being out under the stars. And so we'll renew our own souls and the souls of a generation in desperate need of help if we undertake the painstaking work of extracting them from their devices and allowing them to experience reality. So my friends, a generation is becoming lost to the joy and wonder of that drama. And each one of us is called to help them experience the joy of the true and the good and the beautiful in the experience of real, concrete, lived experiences, stories, songs, poems, and yes, even waltzing and rock bands if they're good, like the Avett Brothers. Or Van Morrison, who's my all-time hero. Anyway, I won't get off that text. I'm watching this, Mari. I know where we are. Okay. Among the good, sorely needed by iGeners is the good of friendship. And this is my second point, friendship. This May, a Catholic author, Rebecca Fretch, will release a book called Can We Be Friends? And the book is about the crisis of loneliness that many of us are experiencing. I'm looking forward to reading the book because it talks about a reality that I have observed in my own pastoral ministry as a bishop that we do not know how to become friends with one another. And I'm sure the sisters who teach in high school will also affirm that. A few weeks ago, I had the chance to spend a few days with one of my oldest friends, Archbishop Paul Conley of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City. He was my roommate and fellow deadhead all through college. All 4 years we lived together. In high school, we used to travel around going to Grateful Dead concerts. I'm not going to talk about the Grateful Dead. You can ask me what my favorite Grateful Dead album is after the talk. We met in the 7th grade when we both played on the same baseball team, and my dad was the coach. And it was an occasion for me to think about the power of that friendship that I've experienced in my life. Not just his, but all of my friendships. Friends with the University of Dallas students who are here tonight, and the different ages or phases of my life. My friends have always witnessed to the power of God in their lives and given me a lived experience of the Catholic faith and of Catholic culture. Like I said, sometimes I would describe my conversion as reading my way into the Catholic Church, and that's true to a certain extent, but it was really the friendships that I had. And it was seeing the faith in other people lived out, that, maybe I could be like that. Again, Newman says that the next to the power of supernatural grace in a soul, the next most powerful thing is the example of virtue in another person. And if we think about it in our own lives, those people who have inspired us to want to do better, they've been people who have given us that example of love and friendship and virtue and goodness that we want, that we kind of saw we were lacking. We didn't have that. And so we were inspired to go further, go beyond of what we could do. By means of direct impressions of the faith of my friends, the Lord touched my own heart and continues to touch it in renewing these friendships. Friendship has that power. Christian friendship has the power to awaken hearts and minds to the living presence of Jesus Christ. I mentioned that I served as the University of Dallas Rome campus chaplain for a number of years in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And the friendships I made with those college students back then endure to this day, not just here in Phoenix, but almost everywhere I go. I bump into UD students, former UD students. The friendships I made with those college students, I cherish. Friendship is an extraordinary human good, and in truth, also a supernatural good as well. It might be helpful for a few moments to make this more clear, to consider what friendship actually is about. It seems to me that we have a very thin and hollow notion of friendship these days. We can friend a lot of people on social media, but what is true friendship? The great British writer C.S. Lewis, who also had a big impact on my conversion in the early part of it, says that true friends stand, quote, side by side, their eyes looking ahead at a third thing. Lewis said that friendship must be about something, because friends are travelers on the same quest. Friends, he says, have all a common vision. Lewis says that friendship begins with fundamental questions. Do you see the same truth that I do? Do you care about the same truth that I do? Do you see the world as I do? When Jesus Christ invites us to friendship, which is the deepest kind of friendship, he invites us to be travelers on a quest with him, to share in the mission of the incarnation, his crucifixion, and his resurrection. Christ invites us to be friends with him by inviting us to share in his mission. And that mission is the salvation of the world. That we're part of this big master plan, and that God needs us and uses us, and that we're important to him in working out his plan of salvation. When the two first apostles, Andrew and John, encountered Jesus for the first time along the banks of the Jordan River when John the Baptist was baptizing. Do you remember that conversation? Jesus turned to the two, Andrew and John, and asked them, "What do you seek?" And the two disciples said, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" And the Lord said, "Come and see." In the Latin, venite videbimus, which really means come and spend time with me. Come and walk with me. Accompany me. You know, Pope Francis uses that word a lot, accompaniment. That's what friendship is walking alongside someone in good times and in bad. It's marriage. It's the deepest kind of friendship. For better, for worse, for rich or poor, in sickness and in health. And that's what two friends do, is they accompany each other through life. This is the invitation of friendship. Again, my spiritual mentor, Blessed John Henry Newman, said that friendship is a school of love, a school of charity. He thought that human friendship teaches us in a particular way how to exercise universal charity. He had this idea that if we can love those around us in a good way, then we're able to love all of humanity. And you can't love all of humanity unless you love those people closest to you. He once wrote, "The best preparation for loving the world at large and humanity, and loving it duly and wisely, is to cultivate an intimate friendship and affection towards those who are immediately about us." In other words, those that are closest to us. They help us then to love in a more universal sense. Friendship is a school of charity because friendship makes demands upon us. Our friends are those who are most close to us, who share a vision and a mission with us. Our friends are collaborators in the great work, the magnus opus of our lives. But our friends, like us, are human beings, and relationships with human beings require forgiveness, forbearance, patience, and understanding. And we learn those virtues by loving our friends. Here's a quote from Newman again. "The real love of man must depend on practice, and therefore must begin by exercising itself on our friends around us first. Otherwise, it will have no existence. By trying to love our relations and friends, by submitting to their wishes, though contrary to our own, by bearing with their infirmities, by overcoming their occasional waywardness by kindness, by dwelling on their excellences, by trying to copy them, thus it is that we form in our hearts that root of charity, which, though small at first, may, like the mustard seed at last, even overshadow the earth." End of quote. So friendship, true friendship, turns us away from this age of noise and turns us towards something deeper and much more profound. Friends turn us toward love of one another and toward love of God. Friendship restores the sanity of the age that the age of noise challenges. Friendship combats the isolation, the fear of missing out, FOMO, the self-doubt and loneliness of our present age of noise. Friendship offers us something rich in an age of thin gruel. Friendship is real, and reality is deeply satisfying. Finally, my third point. I want to talk about prayer in the age of noise. And this is where I'd like to return to the theme of silence. Here I will be drawing from my pastoral letter on Eucharistic adoration that I released last Easter, entitled Love Made Visible. And I brought copies. You can all take one home with you on the back table when you leave. It's real short. Letters are supposed to be short, so it's a real short letter. But the title, Love Made Visible, is very simple. If God is love, St. John tells us, and in the Eucharist we believe that God is present, then in the Eucharist we see love made visible when we go before the Eucharist. God's first language, St. John of the Cross once said, is silence. In the silence of Eucharistic adoration, we learn true humility. As we kneel before our Creator God, we are confronted with the power and the mystery of God's love. And it is from the silence and humility that we experience a deep communion and friendship with God. Cardinal Robert Sarah, the prefect for the Congregation for Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments in Rome, writes that silence is an attitude of the soul, and that when we adore the Lord in silence, His presence fills our hearts and our imaginations. In silence, kneeling before Jesus, we learn how God speaks to us. We learn how to hear His still small voice, and we learn to speak to God from the depths of our own hearts. In silence, we learn to put aside the plaguing distraction of our time, the chirping and buzzing of our technology, and simply experience the presence of God, which transforms us in peace. God speaks to us when He is present before us in the Eucharist. We need only to learn that language. We need only to dare to kneel humbly before the Lord with trust in God, begin a dialogue of silence, intimate, powerful, and real. You know, there's that famous story of the old man in Ars, and the curé of Ars, St. John Vianney. He used to spend hours before the Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. And he asked the man, the farmer, he asked the man, like, what do you do? What do you do in adoration? And he said, I just watch Him as He watches me. That's all. So, you know, it's simple. The most profound things are very simple. Cardinal Robert Sarah again says that the true revolution comes from silence. It leads us toward God and towards others, so that we can place ourselves humbly at their service, at our neighbor's service. Renewing our souls in the age of noise begins in silence before the Lord. We often resist that truth because it's difficult. It's difficult for us to be still. We often look for something to do. We get fidgety. We look for programs or itineraries or distractions because silence is daunting. You know, it's hard to sit there for an hour, for example, making a holy hour, you know, to kind of keep our mind somewhat focused on prayer because we've got all these things going on, you know. But it's possible, and we can practice that. We can learn that, no matter how old we are. We can learn to kind of recover that tranquility of soul and heart and body. And people are looking for that. I just saw this crazy commercial on TV last week in Lincoln, and it's this guy, very clever. This guy and his wife have this shop downtown where you can pay money. I kid you not, you pay him money, I don't know how much it costs, you pay him money, and you go into this room, and they put these headphones on, you sit in this pool of warm saline water, and they put this dome over you, and you just lay there on your back in absolute, utter silence. And you pay by the hour. And they're knocking down the doors. I mean, he's making a killing. Why? Because people need silence, and they're discovering they have no silence in their lives. Very smart entrepreneur. And there's no religion to this at all. I mean, well, there probably is some kind of weird religion, but there's no... But I mean, he's purely... I mean, he's tapping into something. He's marketing something that he knows there's a market for. In 1654, the great scientist and philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote, and this is a very profound quote, and I just came across this quote just in January. I was on retreat, and our retreat master, who's Father Timothy Gallagher this year, who's written a number of books on discernment of spirits, a great spiritual writer, but he quoted this quote from Blaise Pascal, and it's really profound and simple. It says this: all humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. Let me repeat that. This is Blaise Pascal. He says, all humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. That's profound, because not many people can sit alone in a room for very long. Silence can lead to holiness. All the saints attest to this truth. But becoming holy requires that we abandon the pleasures of our culture of distraction and the comfort of our habits. Becoming holy requires that we enter in the most mysterious places we can fathom, the mystery of silence, in which we are alone with ourselves and with the Lord. The Lord is waiting to transform us in the deep and intimate friendship of holiness. And this can be terrifying. And yet there's nothing more satisfying, because there's nothing more satisfying than the love of Jesus Christ. Once again, Cardinal Sarah says in his book, The Power of Silence, which came out last year, I recommend it, highly recommend it. Quote, he says, it takes courage to free oneself from everything that weighs down our life, because we love nothing so much as appearances, ease, and the husk of things. Carried away toward the exterior by his need to say everything, the garrulous man cannot help being far from God, incapable of any profound spiritual activity. In contrast, the silent man is a free man. The world's chains have no hold on him. End of quote. We discover the love of God and transmit it to the world when we learn the language of the Word, with capital W, in the mystery of silence. Pope John Paul II says that modern man can know the Lord and thus is able to proclaim him, quote, and this is St. John Paul II, above all by letting himself be educated in an adoring silence, because at the summit of the knowledge and experience of God, there is his absolute transcendence. So, dear brothers and sisters, the age of noise presents new challenges to our lives as Christians. We cannot run from them. We cannot eschew technology or become Luddites, totally removed from the world. This is not the vocation of a Christian. That is not what missionary discipleship is all about. But we do have to manage our technology, because if we don't manage our technology, it will manage us. It's created to do that. And the solutions to our new challenges are startlingly simple and very ancient. We're called to form young people in reality, helping them discover the true, the good, and the beautiful, which is all around us. We are called to form meaningful friendships with one another as fellow travelers along the same path. And we are called to begin all things on our knees in prayerful silence before Almighty God. If we can keep these three things in mind, the Lord will renew and restore our souls and make us holy and make us witnesses to a peace that surpasses all understanding amidst the chaos of this age of noise. Thank you for your patience, and thank you for your attention. God bless you.